So I have just finished the newest installment of King's Dark Tidings, Night of Shadows, Book 6, and I have a lot of thoughts. I'm going to say up front that if you have not read books 1 through 5, then you should leave now because I may have to spoil things from those previous books. But before you go, I'll just tell you that this book was excellent and was such a great return to form and reminded me a lot of the early books in the series for people that are big fans of those. I mean, obviously, you're probably if you're watching this, you're probably a big fan of the whole series, but there's something special about those first 2 or 3 books. If you've never read the series before, then check out my spoiler-free review up here somewhere. It may be a little outdated, but the sentiments remain the same. I'm definitely going to do a new why you should read video in the future, but check out that one for now. Now on to the review. So as most of you know, King's Dark Tidings is in my top 3 favorite series of all time. I fell in love with it right away and it's never lost its luster for me. It's just a good series through and through. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have its occasional problems like all series do, but as a whole, it is an amazing series that holds up much better than most others that I've read, and Book 6 is no exception. Night of Shadows feels very reminiscent of the first 3 books before Rezkin got caught up in being like the emperor of pretty much everything. He's back on his own with no one really keeping tabs on him, which is exactly how he likes it. We follow him and his little dragon hatchling as he tries to subvert Cadian's agents' plans at every turn, and he's kind of figuring out his Ielvanon magic with what little training he was able to get from Entris and Azaria, and kind of working in the shadows and revisiting all of the iconic locations that he's been to in the previous books, especially the ones that were really opened up in Book 4. And it was really nostalgic for me to see some of these places again. In the meantime, we follow many of the other characters who are trying to figure out what to do next in the wake of Rezkin's supposed death. Some of these pairings include Malseus and Asaria, Frisha and Thressen, Wesson and Azaria, and Azaria is actually heading out to Shenaria, where the Raven has been recently spotted. And that's pretty much all I can say about the plot without giving too much away. I mean, obviously, Frisha and Thressen are trying to escape Cadian because he had them locked away at the end of the previous book, so they're kind of trying to figure that out. And then Wesson, I don't know if I can talk too much about what he does. He's not like in the book a whole lot, but we do get a couple POVs with him, and he's learning about what has happened to the Mage Academy in Ashai after Cadian took over. So this book was really interesting. Like I said, it was reminiscent of the earlier books, but it feels much more character and relationship focused than the previous books. There's not much here in this book to advance the overall story as a whole, but its focus is rather on developing certain characters, especially Rezkin, Asaria, and Malseus, and Kel Kade clearly needed to get many of these characters into certain positions and mindsets, like certain parts of their character arcs before moving on with the story as a whole. And I think she did a wonderful job. I would actually be really interested to ask her about it and kind of see her thoughts on what she was using this book as, because it did seem kind of like almost like a rest stop on the way to the rest of the story. There's a lot of character growth that happens in this one. And she masterfully ties up a lot of loose ends as far as character development is concerned. I don't think the characters are done with their character arc, but I think, like I said, I think they all needed to get to a certain part of their character arc for this book. And I think that's kind of what this book is focused on. And I think one thing I really wanted from book 5 was more Asaria and Malseus, and oh boy, do we get a lot of it in this one. One of the characters that was painfully missing from this book, however, is Raylan DeVos. I've been waiting for more than a couple books now to see where her character goes, and I think she's only mentioned one time in this entire book. I really want to see how her budding romance with Captain Jimson is going, and with this book being so focused on various relationships, I was really surprised that she wasn't in it more. That being said, the character list at this point in the series is pretty huge, so I have to imagine it's hard to fit everyone's storylines into each entry in the series, but I also think each book could definitely benefit from just being a little bit longer. I got through this book in just one day, and I really felt like it was on the shorter side. Even some of the like isolated plots, like the plots that are specific to this book that we get here, they felt just a little bit rushed to fit into this short of a book. I don't think they were super rushed. I don't have like a big issue with it or anything, but it just felt like a really short book. And by the time I got to the end of it, I was kind of like, no, I'm not ready for it to end. I wish I had like another 5 hours with this audiobook. Now, I've seen some criticism online about how the plot as a whole doesn't really move forward too much in this book. I kind of mentioned that earlier a little bit. I have mixed feelings about it. I do love the overall plot of the series, and I want to see how they're going to take down Kadean and what's to become of Ashai and ultimately Rezkin. And of course, I want to find out all the little secrets and connections and all that, like that great scene that we got in book 4 where we finally get to talk to Conovan, the previous Rez, and he kind of reveals like a bunch of stuff that was so just juicy. It's like Kel Kade's version of a Sanderlanche, and like what would Kel Kade's Sanderlanche be called? Would that be a Canderlanche, a Kelderlanche, Kelderlanche? I don't know. You guys figure it out and get back to me. But one of Kel Kade's greatest strengths is her ability to write believable characters. And if we get some books that are just focused on the characters themselves, then that is perfectly fine with me. I want to spend as much time as I possibly can with all of these characters and just watch them go about their lives. And if that pushes the end of the story out even further, then so be it, because that just means that we get more books in this amazing world with these incredible characters, and I am totally okay with that. Yeah, I would love this series just to like go on forever, like I don't know what, like those Forgotten Realms books or like the Drizzt books have like a ton of books in them. Yeah, I would love it if we got 30 King's Dark Tidings books, if even like 75% of them were excellent. You know what I mean? So I'm really okay with this not moving the plot forward that much. I think we do get a lot of like maybe not a lot. We get like some reveals. They were pretty light in this book, but I think there's enough that at the end of this book you're like, okay, like I feel satisfied. I don't feel like the book didn't really end on a cliffhanger like a lot of the other ones do. And at the end of the book I felt like, okay, I'm ready for the next step in this adventure. One thing I did feel was really missing from this book and book 5 are the really deep and intricate conversations the characters have with each other. There were tons of great dialogue sequences from both books 5 and 6, but we haven't really gotten any like we did in book 2, which in my opinion is the best book in the series so far. In book 2, all of our main characters are stuck on a ship together, and the kingdom of Ashai has not fallen yet, but it's on its way. There was just so much intrigue and really interesting character development through these conversations, and we haven't really seen anything like it since. And I really want to get back to that, because that's what made me fall in love with the series. I loved... Oh, sorry, I got something stuck in my eye. Did you guys did you guys see my eye twitch for a second there? Um, yeah, I that's what made me fall in love with the series, and I loved not only the discussions that happened on the ship, but also moments like Tyrion and Rezkin becoming friends, like when they're on their horses, like going away from the what's Tyrion's surname from that manor. Um, and them becoming friends and the way they discuss life, which made Tyrion become less of an insufferable noble and actually like turned me around on his character. And I was like, wow, this is actually going to be an amazing character. And I'd love to get back to that because I would love those moments like our King's Dark Tidings, like the redemption of characters that you don't think can be redeemed, like characters like even Azaria, if you've read book 5, hopefully you have if you're watching this, dear God. But like even Azaria at the beginning was very like off-putting, and by the end of book 5, I was like, okay, I'm interested in seeing where she goes. But yeah, I'd love more of those moments, and we certainly do get like I said, this book has tons of character development, and I love that. But I think we're just missing those like super deep, intricate conversations that were full of like politics kind of, but they were also just like talking about the world and their views on the world, and it got very like deep and introspective, and like what is the right thing to do, like what is the gray area, like is there a purely right thing to do, is there a purely wrong thing to do. And like Tam and Frisha both like they had that period of time in book 2 where they were struggling with the idea that Rezkin has killed people, and at the time they thought it was just like one time. But and people were explaining to them like, well, he's if he has this sword, that means that he was given that sword because the king trusts him. And so if he's probably had to kill someone, and both Tam and Frisha were like really struggling with that, and I loved the whole discussion around that. Sorry, I'm going on for far too long about this, but I just would really love if we could get back to some of that stuff as well. But let's get back to the good, though. This book has an amazing balance to it. Like, Rezkin is certainly the center stage as usual, but there's so many other characters that share the spotlight, and Kel Kade does an excellent job highlighting them and giving them a life outside of Rezkin, which I think is kind of the point of this whole book, is to give the other characters a lot of autonomy. Like we get like a solid amount of Rezkin. Like he by far has the most POV chapters. But I think the point of this book and the point of him going his own way for a time is to allow the other characters to shine, because for so often in the previous books everything hinged around Rezkin and his plans, with everyone kind of waiting on him hand and foot. And this book, they are forced to do things on their own and really grow and thrive, and I absolutely loved it. I didn't know how I would feel about it at the end of book 5, where I'm like, what do you mean Rezkin's going away? He's just like going off on his own to like figure himself out. And I have to say, it was something that like really worried me about that ending. But I can say Kel Kade absolutely nails it in this book. It doesn't feel like super navel gazy. It doesn't feel like, oh, Rezkin's just off like finding himself. That's not what's happening at all. He kind of does do that throughout the story, but it's not like super shoved in your face. It was done like really, really well. I was extremely surprised how well it was done. Um I also loved how we get to see Rezkin just back in his element as the shadowy rogue, putting on disguises and sneaking around, stealing things, intimidating people, and otherwise doing the whole lone wolf thing. And like I said, it reminded me a lot of the first three books where Rezkin in those first couple books is leaving his friends and he's going and doing things on his own, and he's doing, everything I just mentioned. And I think this book was very much a return to form, and it, no spoilers, but it kind of seems like the next book is going to be that way as well, which I'm all about. I love that so much. We also see him grow a lot, like I said, and by the end of this book, I was so proud of how far he's come since the early days of his like detached and stoic demeanor. He even makes a joke in this book, which was shocking to say the least. We also get to see what becomes of the hatchling dragon that we saw at the end of book 5, and it's made it into my list of favorite animal companions. This is going to be a fantastic addition to the series. At first I was a little skeptical of how Rezkin would utilize a dragon, but Kel Kade writes it into the story with great effect, and you will not be disappointed for sure. Last thing I'll mention real quick is if you liked the Lon Laresh stuff in book 4, you're gonna love what's going on in this book. It's really really reminiscent of that. But I really want to steer clear of spoiling too much, so I'll end the spoiler-free section of the video by just saying I enjoyed this book so much, and I'm sure it'll make it into my top 5 for the year, as well as landing itself in my top 3 favorite King's Dark Tidings books. I think it was just excellent, and this book made me laugh out loud, and it made me cry, and otherwise just made me so happy to have another installment to the series. I'll also end this section by saying that Kel Kade has agreed to come back onto the podcast for another episode after the holidays, after like the first of the year. So leave any questions for her down in the comments, and it just might make it into the episode. We'll try to fit those in for sure. But we are going to do a spoiler discussion as a podcast very soon here, so keep an eye out for that episode. Also, if you want to see our episodes live, you can go to Patreon and support us there for whatever the Mistborn tier is. I forget what it is, but support us at the Mistborn tier, and you can watch us, like you can be there as we interview Kel Kade, or not really interview her, we're just hanging out with her and talking about books and stuff. But you can be there live and ask her questions. That's something you really don't want to miss, and you only get that by heading over to our Patreon. That supports us a lot. And quick shout out, thank you to all our Patreon supporters, because you guys bought Gabe a microphone this year, so you're all awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, but here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna give you a big spoiler warning, and I'm going to give you a few of my like spoiler-filled thoughts. It won't be a lot, probably. We'll see how much I ramble. But if you have not read Book 6, Night of Shadows, then you need to click off the video right now. I'll give you a second to pause the video, come back when you've read it. Okay, so at the time of this recording, I've just finished the book, like literally a couple hours ago. I'm going to do a reread pretty much immediately, and we'll do an episode where we go deep into this book, discussing it scene by scene, because there's so much good stuff to dig into. But for now, I want to talk about a few things that came to mind. And of course, we have to talk about Malseus and Asaria. Oh my god. Guys, I've been waiting for this for so long. I've literally been on board for this relationship since book 4, since it started to poke its head out of the woodwork in book 4. And back then, I did not see it coming. I love the whole bond. I love how he's like holding on to her gem. I am a total hopeless romantic, and I love the idea of Malseus holding on to Assyria's soul and staying by her side to keep her alive and well. And I love the moment when Rezkin reveals that Malseus has been doing this to Issaria. And there's a great quote while we're in her point of view. And the quote is practically everything he had done for more than a year was all for her. And it's obviously a really simple quote, but in the moment it's just like it's this thing where she's having like dawning realization after dawning realization, like, oh my god, because the whole book she's asking him like, why are you still by my side? Like, Rezkin's dead, you can go do whatever you want, you don't have to stay by me. Like, technically we have this what do they call it, consort ship, whatever, and technically like they're married in the rest of the world because he recognized the bond. She's like, we got this thing going on, but she's like, I'm not holding you to it, like you can go, you don't need to be here. And he's like, nope, I will remain by your side. And she's like, well, are you just gonna stay by my side for the rest of my life, or like what, because Rezkin may never come back. And he says, I'll stay by your side until Rezkin, like, until, you know, he's like, I'm going to follow Rezkin's orders until he tells me not to, basically. And there's this moment, even then, this is pretty early on in the book, but there's a moment even then when Issaria is like, you know, oh God, I forget the exact quote, but she was like, okay, I looked up the quote because I wanted to remember it. It seemed that she would be stuck with him for life, and for some reason the notion did not bother her as much as it should have. And this whole romance was built up so perfectly throughout this entire book. Kel Kade just knocked it out of the park with this. I think it's probably like the best relationship arc in the series. It's so good. But yeah, so I talked about the quote, practically everything he had done for more than a year was all for her. And it was just this moment where she just, like, all these little things add up, like all of these little things that have happened throughout the previous, like, whatever it's been, like 2 years or whatever, or probably more than that. It's probably been more than 2 years. I can't remember. But it just all came to a head, and she had this realization after Rezkin revealed it. And you know, it had to come out eventually. I was wondering when she was going to find out about her soul in the stone. And it was everything that I've been waiting for. I love that they're finally together and both so enthusiastic about it. And it just really hit the spot as far as romances in books go. It was done so well, so subtly, and it had just the perfect amount of build-up, like I was saying. Now, okay, I do have exactly one complaint about it, and this really surprised me. I don't think that Malseus should have been in love with her the entire time. I think it worked much better with Malseus being incredibly resentful of her and then growing to love her. I liked the idea of him being like my brother died because of you, and then like also resenting like Rezkin at the same time. He's just got all this anger, and through that, you know, through getting to know her, she kind of like changes him, because I think, you know, that's what relationships do a lot of the time. They help people grow, and they help people like kind of change their outlook on things, and I think that's really important. And so I didn't really like that Malseus was like, actually, I've been in love with you the entire time. I saw you before my brother did, and he just happened to, you know, have the balls to talk to you and ask you out. Yeah, I don't know if I fully buy it. Like, I just don't think that there's any foreshadowing in that second book that supports it. Like, I'd have to go back and read it, but I don't think there's anything there that like foreshadows this in any way. But at the same time, the hopeless romantic in me wants to believe it. I love the idea, I like deep down, I love the idea of like, ooh, like what if Malseus was like actually in love with her the entire time, and it was kind of like this big, like long romance, this thing that he's kept bottled up for a long time. Like the romantic in me wants to believe that, but I don't know. It just, I was like, I just don't see it. But at the end of the day, like, it doesn't ruin anything for me. I just wish that there had been more in the beginning to kind of show that this was going on. That's my only issue. My issue isn't with that he did love her the whole time. It's just that there wasn't enough supporting it, I think. But with that, one more thing that I really loved about this whole plot thread is that when Malseus confesses his feelings for Issyria, she initially says, "I think I love you too." She said this like in the middle of a kiss, and he's like, "Wait, what?" Like he's like, "I love you," and she's like, "I think I love you too," and Malseus is kind of like taken aback at this, but it felt very real for Issyria. She doesn't give herself over to those feelings that easily at all. Like even with Pallas, she was like, I don't know about this. Like, I don't know. Like, I'd have to like look at my feelings and see how I feel about this. But I think it would have felt cheap if she had just fully dove in right then and there and been totally on board with it. But then the reason I say this is that at the end, when Malseus is poisoned, I loved this moment where she's holding him and screaming, I'm certain, Malseus, don't you die, I'm certain." And oh god, it was so good. And then of course, shortly after that, she falls into, there's like a pit of lava. I have to go back and reread to like understand the scene better, but she falls into like this pit of like lava basically, and the guy in front of her like plummets to his death, and then she's like about to fall, and it's like, oh, it's over for Issyria, and then her arm is grabbed at the last second, and Malseus pulls her up, and she's like, "You caught me," and he's like, "I will always catch you," and it just, ooh, like it warmed my cold dead heart for a minute, guys. Like man, it was fantastic. You guys know that I'm the person on the podcast that loves like these romances in fantasy books. I don't really like romantasy books. Like if the whole plot is focused on a romance, that I'm kind of like, it's just I need more foundation for it. But every now and then in a fantasy book of any kind, you just get one of these like whirlwind romances, and it just hits the spot. Okay, we'll take a short break from all the romance talk. Sorry if I was making anybody like nauseous. But I will eventually have to talk about Rezkin and Azaria, so you guys know. And Frisha and Tyrion. We got to talk about them too. But speaking of Frisha, I loved her scenes with Thressen. This was so good. I did not expect to love this duo as much as I did. As a podcast, we were kind of wondering what was going to become of Frisha, because we felt like she needed a bit of a character upgrade, not in like a magical way, but just like as a character, she needed some growth. She needed something to define her a little bit better. And while she still doesn't have, like she doesn't have her big like magical upgrade yet, or I don't even know if that's the plan for her character, but she didn't get like her big like upgrade like Tam did. But it was awesome to see her on the run with Thressen and using her knives. And if you remember from book one, Rezkin gave her this knife belt, and she had been learning to like throw knives and to like use them in various ways. And so it feels very fitting that all of a sudden she's like using these knives and killing multiple people on while they're on the run. And she has this moment. She finally has this dawning realization that many of the other characters had long ago. Like many of the other characters realized this a while back, like in book 2 or 3. But she realizes why Rezkin has to kill and why he can be so detached from it, because she realizes that it's like sometimes it's simply something that needs to be done, and she doesn't feel bad about it. She's like, these people were attacking us and we had to get away, and I had to protect myself and protect Thressen, and she's like, I understand this a lot better. And I love the conversation that her and Thressen have where he's asking her like why do you think Rezkin doesn't love you? Or no, he asked he's like, would you ever, he's like, do you regret giving up your engagement to Rezkin? And she's like, I realized a lot about Rezkin. And she says everything that I just said, basically. But she's like, the thing still is that he does not feel emotions in the way that I feel emotions, and I need someone who does. And so I loved kind of that conclusion to that, because in book 4 it was so heartbreaking seeing them like break up, and they have kind of this weird estrangement for a while, and she's like kind of weird around him, and it seems like she has now had a really good character arc. This is one of the people, like besides Malseus and Assyria, this is one of the characters that I was saying had like a really good, like they did their character arc. Maybe it's not like a completed arc, but they got to where Kel Kade needed them to get to for the next book. And I think Frisha really shows that in this book. And I guess part of that character arc is that it was just fun to see her on her own, having to survive, without a master swordsman protecting her. She had Thressen, but he was no Kai or Rezkin. He was awesome in his own right with his earth magic, and I can't wait to see what happens with him. But seeing Frisha have to like survive on her own without the boys, you know what I mean? Like it was really nice to see her grow in that way. But going back to Thressen, we didn't get too much with him in this book, but I'm sure that he's going to have a big role to play in the next couple books, and so I'm really looking forward to that. And I can't wait for us to do our podcast, not only with just like the co-host, but also later with Kel Kade, and be able to ask a little bit more about Thressen and try to see, what role he's going to play in the future. Really interested. So Rezkin gets the ability to fast travel thanks to his dragon companion Sina, and I kind of have mixed feelings about it. Not really. I liked it, but it allows us to kind of jump around to a lot of different locations throughout the world, and even do some really cool things in battle, like when Rezkin was able to jump behind the demon using the portal and kill it from behind. But it also makes me wonder if we won't get those great like traveling scenes that we did in previous books, like in books 2 and 4. Or, maybe I'm wrong and we totally still will get those. I really can't make up my mind on this one. But I do love the dragon. I think she's the perfect companion for Rezkin, and I love that it was the bond with an animal that taught Rezkin empathy, because for those of us that have, say, like a dog, I think we've all felt the heartbreak of when our little friend is in pain or is sick or whatever, and that feeling of just wanting to make them feel okay again. And I think that was really important for Rezkin to get to that point, because we saw in book 5 that he didn't have that empathy. They're like, what do you mean you don't have empathy? He's like, I just don't. And so I think it's really fitting that an animal was able to bring that out in him, because I've noticed my dog is literally sitting here at my feet, and I've noticed just in myself since I got him, I have grown in a lot of ways, like wanting to care for him and take care of him and stuff. And I think it just makes sense for Reskin to get there through an animal companion. But at some point around book 4, I was actually starting to think that Reskin, I was starting to think like Reskin needed to start feeling these things after being out in the world for so long and having so many like deep connections with people. Um, and I'm really glad that he's getting there. Obviously, there was a period of time where I thought that Reskin would always be stoic and detached, and I thought that would actually kind of be his undoing and cause him to really mess things up, because there was a period of time, was it around book 3, I think, where his companions were like, what is going on with this guy? Like we can't get through to him emotionally at all. And so I'm really glad that he's starting to come around. He's still very stoic and is like the stalwart warrior. But he has these little like cracks of emotion. I think it's going to do him a lot of good. Okay, we got to talk about Tam. I don't know how I feel about this one either. Obviously, I think it's super cool that Tam has this upgrade and now he can talk to and seemingly command the Anan as a general in their army. But I was a little bummed to see him sidelined once again. I really hope that Kel Kade starts using him in bigger ways after he was enslaved for an entire book. And now he's kind of enslaved once again. It felt like a rehash of what's already of what he's already been through, and I really hope that he's utilized really well in the next book. And Kel Kade has really not let me down with any of these characters yet, so I have total faith that she has a plan for him. I was surprised that we only got the one scene with him, and I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is the book is very short, and so there wasn't a lot of time to utilize him, but I would have loved to have seen a little bit more progression on Tam's side of things, especially now that he has this cool power. I want to see him even more. I want to see him use it. I also love that Reskin spent an entire week out there in his cabin with him. I would love to see what they did for that week. I think, yeah, I'm so curious what they were up to for a week. So not so much a fully fleshed out thought, but was Reskin disguised as Orve? Is that how you pronounce it? Orve, the entire time. I need to go back and reread it because I don't know how else he would have known to disguise himself as Orve at the end there. Because in the epilogue it says that he's, walking off the ship and he puts on the disguise of Orve. And I'm like, wait, that would make like a lot of sense since he had the message from the Fishers and he was in the same area that Frisha and Thressen were. And so I wonder if, and there was even that chapter, I think it was the chapter after they met him. It was sometime after they met him, and it said that Reskin, I think it was when he was sneaking out to meet Azaria, and it was saying like he had to sneak out of his house like really carefully because he didn't want to alert the people that he was staying with. And so I'm like, I wonder if he was disguised and he was there. But yeah, that would be funny because that means that he just essentially disguised himself and met up with Frisha and Thressen on the road and played that role completely, going all the way to Kyle without revealing himself. So I think that's super interesting. Maybe it's something that I'll pick up a little better on a reread. And yeah, with that, it's kind of funny that he was helping his friends from the shadows the whole book. He's like off on his own. He's like going to let them do his own thing, but he couldn't help like getting involved and like helping them out where he could, because like he couldn't let them know that he was alive, but he just kept like intervening and stuff. I thought that was really good. I was really surprised how he just kept revealing himself to like certain people after the fact in the last like quarter of the book, even though he initially wanted no one to know. And so like who knows at this point? It's like Malseus and Issyria, Azaria, Tam, and Wesson. Are those I think it's just those four people that know. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, so last couple things. Issyria becoming queen of Lan Laresh was amazing. I love all the Lan Laresh stuff. I think it's by far the most interesting culture that Kel Kade has written, and I'm so glad that we got to go back there. Also, Frisha reuniting with Tyrion was fantastic. I do think that Kel Kade could have kept them apart throughout like the entirety of the book and had them reunite at the end, because we didn't really get much out of the golem, and it kind of seemed like it was set up to be a bigger deal than it ended up being. Like maybe it'll play a role down the road. But that aside, I love the moment where Tyrion finally realized that Frisha was telling the truth. And like that scene was so good, where he's going down into the dungeon and he's like, we're going to lock her and Thressen and Orvway up. And then he pulls like the golem out of the cell. He's like, what the hell? And he like stabs it and it doesn't bleed. And he just looks so just demure, just like so down, like, oh my gosh, I've just like yelled at these people that I care about. It was so good. And the heartfelt conversation that they had back in his office. I really wish that we had gotten one final scene with them near the end of the book, like either in the epilogue or like the chapter just before that. I think them and Wesson needed one more scene to kind of wrap things up for their POVs. But I'm really excited to catch up with them again in Book 7. And I hope that also in Book 7, we see Brant and his twin. I'm really curious to see what's going on with that. Lastly, we have to talk about Azaria and Rezkin. I loved her seeking out the Raven and infiltrating the Thieves Guild in a very similar way to Rezkin and Free the Darkness. It really shows how similar they are and how they're kind of a perfect match. I loved the dream sequences being the way that Rezkin was able to communicate with her. I thought that was really well done, and then her conversation with Entris was really interesting as well. It kind of felt like he was pretty wishy-washy on whether he would need to kill Rezkin, or if he even thought that Rezkin was going mad. But then she seemed pretty convinced that he would in fact kill Rezkin, so I'm not sure what the plan is there. But Rezkin finally showing up and revealing himself to Azaria was amazing. It was just absolutely perfect. I loved every second of it, where he just like has the shadow around his head and he's like, I've come to return Rezkin to you, and then takes the shadow away, and she just like pounces on him. It was so good. This whole book, I thought that out of everyone, Azaria should have been by his side during this series of events. Like, she would have easily kept pace with him and stayed hidden and everything. And I love that Rezkin was finally able to just fully let his guard down, knowing that she wouldn't kill him. Like when she like jumped on him, like he was like, I know that she's not gonna hurt me. Yeah, I'm so excited to see where they go in the next book. I think it makes total sense for them to be traveling together now. And, you know, like I said earlier, I wasn't really sure how I felt about Azaria, you know, in book 5. I was kind of like, okay, I'm like, I was still like, part of me was still rooting for, you know, Rezkin and Frisha, or Rezkin and I don't know who else would be a good romance. Like Mage Thrall, I thought that could have been an interesting one. It was never going to happen, but I thought it could be interesting. But I was kind of like, I was like, I don't know about Azaria. But then reading this book, I was like, okay. I'm like, this is obviously gonna be like the big romance for him. It's not gonna be anybody else. So I'm interested to see where it goes for sure. Well, I have been rambling. This is a much longer video than I anticipated it being. Yeah, I thought this was going to be like a 20-30 minute video, but it's gone on much longer, but that's okay. But I guess to wrap it up, like I don't even know what to say, guys. We waited so long for this book and now it's finally here. I can't wait to give it another couple of rereads and try to catch all the little things I missed. I really loved this book. I truly enjoyed it, and like I said, I think it's in my top 3 favorite KDT books. We're like right up there with like 2 and 4 being my favorites. But it's exactly what I needed at the end of the year, and I'm just going to be totally honest with you guys. I've had like a really difficult couple of weeks. This whole like back half of the year has been pretty hard, honestly. And this book just like lifted my spirits so much and made me forget my worries for a time. So, Kel Kade, if you're watching this, thank you. But yeah, we have a lot of King's Dark Tidings content coming up. I'm going to try and do a story recap for books 1 through 5 for anyone who needs them before starting this book. And then we have our big Night of Shadows deep dive discussion. And then we have Kel Kade coming on for a chat. And then next year, we will be going book by book through the entire series with our new co-host Sam, who up until now has not read any King's Dark Tidings. So that will be super fun. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I love that KDT is fostering a bigger community, and I just love talking about these books with you guys. Chat with me in the comments or over on Twitter, and let me know what you thought of Night of Shadows or any of the King's Dark Tidings books, and let us know what questions you would ask Kel Kade, and we'll try to bring them up on our discussion with her probably in January or February, somewhere around there. And then don't forget, if you want to see that live, go support the Patreon, and you can be there with us live as we talk to Kel Kade. But yeah, until then, have a great New Year's and Christmas, and always remember Rule 57: remain in the shadows when possible, and Rule 1: protect and honor your friends. Bye, everybody.